I think I've said before in these videos that one of the first games I ever played was Baldur's Gate 1. I was definitely too young at the time to properly appreciate it, but it made enough of an impact that I became an instant fan of both BioWare and Black Isle Studios. While I may have fallen off BioWare in the years following Mass Effect 2, Black Isle is a studio I've continued to follow to this day, albeit under a different name. Through the second Baldur's Gate game and Knights of the Old Republic 2, on to games I wouldn't play until much later, like Pillars of Eternity or Fallout New Vegas. Obsidian's one of those few studios whose new games I always look forward to. Naturally, when they announced a new action RPG set in the Pillars of Eternity world, I couldn't wait to play it. Now that it's finally out, and I'm about 40 hours into my first playthrough, how did Avowed turn out? Before we dive into that, there's something I should probably clarify. For the last 14 years, the action RPG space has been dominated by Bethesda's second biggest success, Skyrim. And as you might expect, comparisons between Skyrim and Avowed have been everywhere since the first review copies came out. In fact, the odds are good I made one such comparison myself in the title of this very video. Skyrim is, in my humble opinion, a pretty alright game. At the time of writing, I'm sitting around 300 hours played on Steam, and a further 70 on the original Xbox 360 release. It's a brilliant simulation of a medieval world that a couple times per year I get the itch to get lost in for an hour or 10. And the addition of mod support was a genius choice on Bethesda's part. It's helped keep the game relevant in pop culture for over a decade. That all being said, there is one major area I feel Avowed blows Skyrim out of the water, but we'll get back to that later. On the gameplay side, Avowed is a brand new entry in that style of action RPG that I always wish we got more often. Your character build is determined by your attributes and your abilities. There are 6 attributes covering the usual suspects for a game like this, and each provides small, passive buffs tailored towards one of the many possible builds in the game. Attributes also provide new options in conversations at certain thresholds, which means that different builds can tackle the same quest in 2 different ways. And unlike what tends to happen in most games like this, there's no charisma stat or persuasion skill, which means that each attribute has plenty of opportunities to shine in different situations. Your abilities define what your character can do in combat. There's a mix of active and passive abilities spread across the 3 main trees, but don't let that fool you into thinking that there are only 3 builds in the game. The original Pillars of Eternity games were CRPGs, and since Avowed is set in the same world, the devs took a lot of care to find ways to recreate most of the classes in-game. There are no attribute requirements or set classes that force you down a particular path, and the game allows you to respec your attributes and abilities freely for a nominal fee, so there are tons of chances to experiment with how you build your character. Aside from your abilities, the main thing that determines how your character fights are the weapons that you choose to use. There's a wide variety of 1- and 2-handed weapons and shields, and again, with no attribute requirements, you can experiment and switch things up as you feel. One-handed weapons can also be dual-wielded, though I'm not going to admit how long it took me to figure that one out. Being able to dual-wield allows for some really interesting combinations, though you'll want to be a bit careful. Stamina management is a key part of combat, and wielding more than one weapon at once can chew through your stamina pretty quickly. As an example, say you wanted to aim for a melee magic hybrid build, you can wield a sword alongside a grimoire for whenever your essence needs time to recover. A more dexterity-focused character can use 2 daggers, or a dagger and a pistol, or even 2 pistols, which is what I've been running around with for the last couple hours of the game. 2-handed weapons trade that speed and flexibility of dual-wielding or one-handed weapons for much larger damage numbers. And so far, I've found each to be useful at different points in the game. All gear and every enemy that you fight has a quality rating, running the usual tiers from common to legendary. Having a gap between the tier of what you're using against the enemy that you're fighting causes either a damage penalty or bonus, depending on which way it is. It's nowhere nearly as annoying as that might sound, and was actually nerfed while I was working on this video. There's no level scaling in the game, so having a tier system like that serves to keep the early fights in each area challenging, while making it also very satisfying to just breeze through packs of enemies once you're properly geared for the area. Quality tiers are also the main focus of the crafting system, though Avowed's take on crafting is much closer to The Witcher's, where materials are just tied to regions, usually just to check player power, as opposed to Skyrim's smithing skill. As you might expect from a game in this genre, Avowed also features a stealth system, though it's a far cry from the free win those tend to be in other games. Hiding is limited to certain clearly marked foliage, in which enemies won't see you unless they actively bump into you, and you can execute either a backstab if you're close to an enemy, or get a bonus to your damage on a ranged attack if you aren't. The damage that the backstab does seems to be tied to the quality of your weapon, so it's not a guaranteed kill against strong enemies, but any amount of free damage is a plus in my book. Once you make your attack of choice, though, any surviving enemies that are looking in your direction will aggro immediately, so stealth is more of a strong opening to a fight instead of an easy way to cheese it. Avowed also features two fairly unique elements that I hope more games will experiment with. There's a parkour system that allows your character to vault low walls and pull themselves up to short ledges. It adds a lot of verticality to the world, which breathes a lot of life into the exploration, as well as opening up potential approaches to many of the fights. The world also features a number of destructible barriers that can be cleared through a variety of elemental grenades or spells. Often they just hide treasure chests, but sometimes they open up a new approach to a problem. For example, who needs to find a key to a locked door when you can just knock down the wall next to it? Of course, all the fun combat and exploration in the world doesn't matter much if where it's happening isn't interesting, and I'm happy to report that the Living Lands is so much more than that. I can't help but feel that someone at Obsidian has to have taken the old Fallout New Vegas critique that the Mojave was flat and lifeless personally, because every region in Avowed is just jaw-dropping. The Living Lands is a massive, mostly unsettled island that perfectly captures that feeling of a hostile and untamed frontier no matter where you go. Each region that you visit over the course of your adventure evokes that in a very different way. The Mediterranean region of Dawnshore, with its large city of Paradise, almost doesn't feel like a frontier at first, though stray too far beyond the city walls and the bandits and monsters will quickly remind you that you're not welcome here. The second region you visit, Emerald Stair, is not so welcoming. The citizens of Fior Messaverno are on a losing struggle with nature, to the point where the streets and buildings are choked with vines, and killer mushrooms roam the ruined farms just outside the city gates. And if you can believe it, the other regions are even less hospitable than that. The two things that tie all the regions together are the ruins that dot the landscape and rampant fungal growth. Both are consistent everywhere you look and hint at some deep wrongness in the world. There were people here once, and finding out what happened to them and why everything is choked with mushrooms is one of the driving mysteries of the adventure. And what good is an adventure without some companions to share it with? Fortunately, Avowed has 4 companions that join you on your journey through the Living Lands. While that may seem like a small number of party members for an RPG, in practice, keeping the number limited means that more time and attention can be given to each of them. Each of your party members represents one of the major factions in the Living Lands, though they're very much their own characters with established past lives and personality quirks. The first one you meet, Kai, is a friendly and outgoing ex-soldier who takes you under his wing more or less as soon as you land at Paradise. He's got a strong sense of justice and will always be the first to speak up in defense of the locals. And as your party grows, he falls into something of a second-in-command role. As you learn more about him, though, you quickly get the feeling there's something in his past that's weighing him down. Though, like most soldiers I've met, he's slow to trust anyone with that part of his backstory. Marius, the second party member you meet, is the opposite of Kai in just about every way. He's reserved and short-tempered, keeping everyone, including you, at a distance and preferring to stay laser-focused on the job, to the point where it can come off as callous in a lot of situations. In other words, he's a survivor through and through. And it wasn't until nearly the 35-hour mark of my playthrough that I learned his backstory. The other 2 characters are equally as fun and bring their own set of hang-ups, but I'll let you discover those. One of the most interesting things Avowed does with your companions is have them serve as a source of feedback for the players. They're always quick to speak up when you make a decision that they like, and even faster if it's one that they don't. And if you're struggling with a decision, you can even ask for their advice. Most of them also have a utility ability that can clear certain elemental barriers, so if you don't have or want to use the grenades, they can help out with that. Now, back at the start of the review, I mentioned that there was an area I thought Avowed easily outclassed Skyrim, and that's in the actual RPG elements. Skyrim's iconic intro segment introduces what seems like two very important plot threads between the dragons and the Civil War. Unfortunately, neither of them actually matters. Resolving the Civil War changes nothing other than who sits on a few admittedly impressive chairs, and allowing you to skip a very annoying quest later in the game. And as for the dragons, somehow in almost 400 hours of playing the game, I've never managed to finish the main story. It's just not why you play the game. Avowed, on the other hand, puts the role-playing and story front and center. From the very beginning, the game asks you to think about who your character is and what motivates their actions. During character creation, you have to pick a background, which, in addition to opening up certain dialogue options, determines who your character was and how they became an envoy of the Adiran Empire. As an envoy, your task is to be the Emperor's eyes and ears in the Living Land. You speak with his voice, his will is your will, and you're expected to work in the best interest of the Empire. Figuring out exactly what that means, though, is some of the most fun I've had in an RPG for years. The game constantly asks you what the Empire means to your character. Is it your ultimate authority? A useful tool? Something that you're gonna have to work around? As a diplomat, you also need to think about what you want the Empire to mean to the people of the Living Lands. Whether it's a needed savior bringing civilization to the savages, or an uncaring and bloated parasite that needs to be removed by any means necessary, is entirely up to you. And the game allows you to lean hard into either of those directions, or several in between. On top of all of that, after the first dungeon, your character starts hearing a voice in their head that often pulls you aside to ask questions. Is it something to be suspicious of and rejected, or nurtured and guided? Again, the game allows you to approach that choice in a variety of ways, and I suspect your answer to that question is going to have a dramatic impact on the plot. There's a lot more I would love to talk about in the story, but given how new the game is, I'm going to stop that there and just let people experience it for themselves. And in so many words, that's where I've ended up, 40 hours into my first time through the game. Well, at the time of writing, I'm still not finished. The game has given me exactly the experience I was hoping for. The combat takes some time to learn, but feels very satisfying once you get the hang of it. The world and characters are engaging, and the story has occupied a frankly absurd amount of my thoughts in the last 2 weeks. I feel it's safe to say that I love this game, and barring a catastrophic drop in quality in however much I have left, I don't see that changing. In fact, this is actually the first review I've ever done where I had trouble finishing it because I just wanted to keep playing the game. And thinking about it more, I feel the obvious comparisons to any of the Elder Scrolls games is kind of like trying to compare two different types of apples. They're each trying to accomplish different things, despite how similar they may seem on the surface. If I were going to compare Avowed to anything, it's Greedfall, but better in every way. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to crawling my way through Galawain's tusks. If you've been playing Avowed yourself, tell me about your experience down in the comments. And if you've enjoyed the video and want more, I recently took a look at one of my favorite games on the GameCube. But if that's not your speed, how about that time Larian took their own crack at an action RPG? Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.